Okay, welcome to week 8 of Introduction to Learning Technologies, everybody. This is Monday, March 2nd, 2015. I had to think about that a minute. And today it's just me. Ryan is off teaching. And we're going to be talking today, I'm going to be talking today with Tim Molnar from the College of Education at the University of Saskatchewan about ePortfolios. As always, if you'd like, you can send in questions if you're in the course on the discussion forum, and I will check and reload that throughout the discussion. But you can also tweet questions and use the hashtag ILT_USask, Introduction to Learning Technologies _USask. And I think we're ready to go. Tim, can you just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm in curriculum studies at University of Saskatchewan. I'm a tenured track professor, and I've been working a lot in the area of science education, but I do Indigenous education related work, and in my current incarnation and distant past I've done some work with electronic portfolios, and that's, I guess, why I'm here.
Yep, that sounds great. Okay, so as I said, this is week 8 of the course, and the last I checked we had about 1,900 people register. Not nearly that many are quite so active, although a number of people did submit their first assignment, which was exciting. We talked a little bit about one of their options for their final project. Actually, they can do anything. There's no marks in this course, and there's peer evaluation that goes on. But one of the suggestions for their final media project, their final project in the course, if they wanted to, they can create an ePortfolio. But I want to start with, when I did my Bachelor of Education, which was at OISE UT a number of years ago, for one of my courses I had to create a portfolio that went in a binder, and that was what we were expected to take out on interviews for our teaching positions. So let me ask you, let's start there. Why portfolios?
Why electronic portfolios or portfolios?
No, let's start with why portfolios.
Okay, sure.
And I know that you're from the College of Education, but I also know that I believe our College of Physical Therapy is using them as well. So in education, why portfolios?
Yeah, so we, in their internship for our teacher candidates, they...
Uh-oh. Tim, you still there?
Okay, are we good?
Yeah, there, I think we're good.
Yeah, okay. So in our college, like a lot of other teacher education colleges, we have a professional growth guide. That's a paper document, that sort of thing. And it's a checklist of things and observations from supervising teachers and, supervisors and cooperating teachers and that sort of thing. I think there was a desire to have a richer collection of evidence brought forward to address the different kind of competencies and goals that were outlined in this professional growth guide. And so we've never actually had portfolios in that sense. It's been this kind of maybe collection dossier of materials that people would bring together, and then there'd be discussion around those things, and then there'd be reporting on how the teacher candidates met those goals. So that's kind of the background for any kind of portfolio, I guess. The electronic portfolio, like the electronic portfolios have been around for a long time in different formats. You know, I guess you can call a lot of different things a portfolio. They're more than just kind of a slap grab of stuff that you throw together. You know, they come in, they're organized, they have a purpose, and there can be multiple purposes. Sometimes the purposes are competing. So for example, if in my case, I'm really interested in students making meaning for themselves and sharing those kinds of things. And so the reflexivity and the process of the portfolio is important for me. For other people, it's the product. You know, what is the final product? The product could be a showcase of your work. It could be demonstration of meeting competencies and that sort of thing. And between those two things, there can be some tension, depending on, you know, of course, what the purpose of the portfolio is. Electronic portfolio, I think, because we're finding out here we have a lot of rural students that go out and do their internships out there. We have we have kind of a rich learning environment where students can do a lot of different things to meet some of the competencies that are outlined or will be coming up in our provincial scenario with teacher qualifications and that sort of thing. So we're also, another reason for electronic portfolio is you can bring some diverse kinds of media to it. You know, it's just not all text. And I can leave that to everybody to just think about the different kinds of things you can link to, bring to, photographs, videos, and etc. that would be acting as evidence, that more than just a text description. So it gives some flexibility and adaptability for that. And again, that competes with what the portfolio is designed for at the end. And in our case, it's kind of a mix of competency, demonstrating your competencies against a list of competencies identified, as well as a meaning-making experience. But anyway, depending on the portfolio platform you're using, the ones that we are using right now is Mahara, which is an open source platform, and it's in development through some universities in New Zealand, which I think the New Zealand government actually supports the open source development. And it's a pretty flexible platform for making meaning. We were just talking a little bit earlier, Heather, about you could actually use a blog or your own HTML pages or whatever to do portfolios. For our purposes, we need to have some standardization around addressing these competencies. So we made that selection for Mahara for a couple of reasons. One, we have ownership of the actual server. You know, so if we want to pull the plug anytime we can, we don't. In Canada, it may sound like not a big concern for some people, but with some of our students, and particularly with our Indian teacher education program, there's some realities around materials that are put up and stuff that we want control of our servers and not to have them in the States or something like that. So that's one aspect to it. I mentioned rural areas. One thing we've been thinking about, and this is coming up for us, is that if you send out a supervisor from the college, it costs money. It can cost quite a bit of money to send them far-flung a couple of times during an internship. So one aspect is to just make it virtual and bring, again, materials and evidence and address the competencies so that, you know, we can actually save a bit of money and also have more flexibility in time, you know. The electronic portfolio also offers kind of that immediate feedback, depending on how you want to structure it, from the supervisor and from the cooperating teacher. And again, there are different aspects of the portfolio we're using that have functions. It's a social network, really, that have functions like groups and friends that you can invite or create groups and friends and share with only particular people. Have comments that are private or not private. So that's just a flexible tool, you know, to bring your evidence of your experience and to share that with the people that are stakeholders in your program. So I guess that's some of the reasoning behind why an electronic portfolio.
Right. Those are all some great reasons. Do you happen to know offhand, and I know this is going to depend on the institution, and I know that this is just sort of a pilot program with the College of Education right now, but do you know offhand how long the students will maintain access to their portfolios beyond the program?
So this is a question, of course. We don't have any firm guidelines because as you said, we're just kind of getting underway with it. We've had some discussion of having it available at least to a year after they graduate. I'd say probably the exporting of the portfolio into like a LEAP format or something like that, or HTML format, that's possible. It's not necessarily the greatest, but it's possible. You can take your stuff out of there and make use of it. Our portfolios aren't designed so much for the professional exposition for a job interview or something, but they could be used for that. It's up to the student who has control of their portfolio to decide on who they'll share that with. And so that's possible. That's something we're looking at, and sort of what are the resources that you'd require to do that. and kind of what is our responsibility to our graduates and for how long. So those are kind of up in the air that way, but certainly it wouldn't be closed off within like a year. We'd be making it available for them to secure the materials out of it.
Right. That's great.
Yeah.
So one question we had was, what are some explicit ways that you can use an ePortfolio in terms of tying it to learning for a course or for a program learning outcomes?
Yeah. Well, with the Mahara setup, well, let me just describe what we're doing with our college. So, in our province, coming down the road, we think, and trying to be ahead of the curve, if you want, there will probably be some teacher competencies that have to be demonstrated by anybody graduating from a college of education. That's what we think is coming up. And there's like 12 or 15 competencies that somehow a teacher candidate has to address and then convince the powers that be that, I'm suitable, I'm certified, I'm ready to go. So there might be that kind of need that's kind of external. There's also I think just the need with any course to have a chance to have an adaptable and flexible way to address the course outcomes, right? So depending on what the course is, an electronic portfolio could be that kind of tool. So could a blog, so could a lot of other things. But again, it comes down to interactions of like what the instructor can handle. Some people some instructors are quite happy with kind of bring your own, technology, and I'll just deal with it, and others need a more firm platform. Yeah. So, I know that in our courses, we've encouraged our instructors. It's not mandatory, compulsory yet, but we have encouraged our instructors to actually write in to their courses some of the teacher competencies that their courses will address. And so, for example, in science education that I do, I might have one in there on, different curriculum strategies, or, how do you link Indigenous knowledges to science knowledge, that sort of thing. And they can take stuff from my class and put it in there, So I'm not quite sure if that answers it entirely, but
right. No, but it creates some good thoughts, because it's really going to depend on what the learning outcomes are, what the program goals are, and how they are intending to use the ePortfolio tool as part of that.
Yeah, so for example, we have musicians in our program. We have kind of a joint program where the music department works with, in the College of Education. So we have music teachers, and things like that. I can imagine, them actually doing performances. They have to do performance pieces and things like that, and that can exist in a lot of forms, but it could exist in a portfolio. The current form of our portfolio is that you have several views or pages, as they call them, and these are all copied into a person's portfolio, and then they start bringing evidence, and then there's a reflection piece, and there's also other aspects. They can create blogs and other things like that. I know that in one of the courses I was doing last year, there were kind of performances that people did in one of our courses, Languages of Knowing, musicians, and there was also people creating digital resources that were best displayed and shared over, of course, some internet type of thing. Having a standard thing like the Mahara portfolio is, it's a suitable area to do that. And people, again, the students have a chance to share with who they want to share with, though they're probably mandated to share with the instructor, of course. But otherwise than that, they can create their own groups within the class if they need for projects and different things like that.
That's handy. This is a question from a student in the course, actually. This question comes from Chris. And the question was, in the course, in this course, there's a video from COFA online which describes a case study in the use of ePortfolios as a reflective teaching tool. The instructor spoke about technological and pedagogical supports they provide. Can you speak about what the College of Education is doing to support students using ePortfolios? Also, do you see this as being an increasingly popular tool across universities in Canada? And I would think that would be like ePortfolios in general.
Yeah, sure. Here in our college, we have two dedicated technology experts who do the kind of the mechanical, technical sides, though that bleeds into some other considerations. So with ours, it's been kind of a hands-on support. Typically, our technician will go into a classroom and get them in the computer lab, and they'll just kind of go together through things. And he's always available, emails and otherwise, for instructors. And he's done some personal one-on-one with instructors and with students. So we have that kind of dedicated person around who's getting to know the ins and outs of it. I know that at other universities, the University of Victoria is running, I think, Folio, which is a Mahara-based electronic portfolio. And I think they actually have a series of videos that they've actually made that you can access. I think I ran across those the other day. So we don't have that kind of thing. There is information that's at mahara.org that you could do. But for us right now, most of the support is coming directly from our technicians.
Mm-hmm. Great.
The second part of that was kind of ePortfolio uptake across the spectrum. That's a good question. Electronic portfolio has been around a long time in different formats. I think what attracted us to the Mahara stuff was, one, that was open source. It was very flexible, adaptable. Like you can just link in Google Apps of all types and different things like that. For me, it was a place to have students make a lot of meaning. Not everybody will be creative, so there's kind of the bell curve with the portfolios, I think. There's like the adopters that'll just do it because they love the technology and the freedom and all that, and then there'll be the kind of the big middle that you kind of have to help along and encourage in, and there'll be the tail ends that will be very resistant. They just don't fit with them. Mm-hmm. And across Canada, as far as implementations of portfolios, that's a hard one to really predict. Some places are doing it because they're under the, I guess, the pressure of, like in a teacher education program, of having to meet these certifications. And typically in Saskatchewan, for example, once you got your BEd, you are certified. And so provincial powers have deemed that this may not be the way it's going to be anymore. And that in BC, I think that's the way it is. Ontario, I think that's the way it is. You have to provide some sort of evidence for certification beyond your BEd. I might have to be corrected in Ontario, but I'm pretty sure that's BC's situation, and maybe our situation. So, the uptake of a portfolio, it seems to be a pretty suitable place for addressing that. And in that case, if the pressure's there, probably you're going to see that kind of uptake happening. Mm-hmm. Maybe it'll be blogs or something like that, but if it's going to be something that's certified by a province or looked at, or you're probably going to look at things that are a lot more regimented, and I don't know if I use the word totally restricted, but they're standardized, be more standardized. Yeah.
So since we're talking about sort of this idea of it being standardized and that this could become a requirement here, and you think is in other provinces for teacher certification, how do you overall assess portfolio?
Good question. That's something we're struggling with. So, I mean, that's a really good question. There's several things to be said about assessment. If it's a straight out assessment of kind of a checkbox, multiple choice kind of test thing, then there's probably other ways to do it. Maybe the old paper ways would be the thing to do. It is a question of what do you want to assess, right? Like, is it assessment for learning, as learning, of learning? Mm-hmm. And in this case, it's a bit of all those things, I guess. But if it's of learning, then you get into that kind of area of what kind of rubrics will you have, mm-hmm. what kind of quality of evidence that you brought forward that can count, And I guess in the end, that'll be determined by whatever powers are overseeing the portfolio. So that could be the college. It could be the government, though I don't know why they'd want to do that. It's a bunch more work for them. I would kind of think they'd be just trusting us that it's good enough, or as they say. But yeah, the assessment with the portfolios, that can be a challenge. It just, and again, I'll just kind of go back to this. There's that kind of process and product aspect, right? Mm-hmm. There can be a lot of pitfalls when you start going down the evaluation road with portfolios, right? There's all sorts of issues about like where the evidence is coming from. Like, is this really someone's writing? If someone is evaluating it, if like a government is evaluating or some department, and they're denying somebody a certification on that basis, there's a lot of legalities in there and stuff like that. Yeah. So as far as the actual assessment, right now for us, it's actually a voluntary kind of thing that for the uptake of our students coming in until we kind of get a better handle on things. I don't see it being at any time, and I could be wrong, my dean might say I'm wrong, that it can really go to being kind of the determiner, beyond the course instructor. Mm-hmm. That's what I would say. Or I know that in some places they do exit interviews and they bring up the portfolios.
Yeah.
And I know they do that at University of Victoria because I was there when they were doing that. And so that's kind of the exit interview would be, I suppose, your check, your assessment, but it probably would not be highly formal in the sense of going through every single thing. Right. I just can't see it manpower-wise or woman power-wise, person power-wise, and just the resources needed to do that. Right. But anyway, that's just some commentary on assessment, I guess.
We did talk a little bit about, if we're not going for the standard, that we need this template and it all needs to be looking the same. This idea that it doesn't have to be an actual ePortfolio tool for an ePortfolio. You can use, there's other tools that we could be using, such as blogs. And I mentioned to you that last week's Hangout, Ryan and I talked about Evernote. And I mentioned that I use Evernote to collect evidence from my ePortfolio, but I actually share it by way of my blog. That's become my portfolio. And it's not a true portfolio in that, it is here's a piece of evidence of something, and here's my reflection. It's much more on, this is the kind of work I'm doing right now. These are my reflections on issues in the field. I'll have my CV as part of it. But you could use technically Evernote if you opened up the pages, if you made them public. But I guess what I want to ask you about is, what are your thoughts, or do you have any other ideas on if somebody was, because there's people in this course there's a lot of people in higher ed, but there's also a lot of people in K-12. And there's people who aren't in education, but they're professionals. So if you don't have the option of having having a IT department install something like Mahara, what do you think are other good options for putting together an ePortfolio?
Okay, well, I don't know if I can speak that fully. A few years ago, I was on a committee at our university that was looking at the use of portfolios, what in nursing and some of the other places across campus, and we were looking specifically at portfolios and professional ones like paid ones and Mahara and even things like wikis and blogs like that. I think in a way it is kind of like bring your own technology. If people are willing to engage with that and use that, like if I was trying to hire somebody, and if I'm open to that, I mean any kind of resource that you can use that if it is a job that can display best your attributes, then I think that's going to vary on the person, right? I don't know if I can't really suggest other things other than the Mahara stuff we're doing. I could see different things. I mean, there's blogging, there's the wikis. There's some different devices. There's just out and out making your own website. Yep. And there's lots of templates for things like that. The thing I liked about Mahara, I guess, is that it does kind of have all those things together, and it really heart is a social networking tool. I suppose you could use Facebook for that matter, or LinkedIn, or some of those things to profile and do your stuff. I guess we're going with the Mahara more because it is that social networking within our own college, right? So we're not kind of making the call to LinkedIn or something like that, or a Facebook group or something. And it is our own kind of little environment that we have control over. But there certainly are other things that you could use,
Right.
you know, for both the meaning-making process side of things and the presentation product side of things.
Right. We've got a question here from Oksana, and I'm actually going to field this one because this is my area. And it was, how would you recommend to compile an e-portfolio for a professional working in the field of instructional design? Now, Tim's touched on a few things about the various competencies that are expected of teachers. So what I would think about for instructional design is what do you think, what are the key competencies within instructional design based on, are you already working in it? And you have to keep in mind that instructional designers, we tend to do a whole bunch of different things, and so it really is hard for me to list competencies for it, but evidence that you understand teaching strategies and assessment and learning styles and the concept of learning styles and issues around that. These days, I think it's incredibly important to be able to demonstrate that you understand the integration of different types of learning technologies. But anything that you can think of that has to do with instructional design, and something as simple as putting it together in a format of demonstrating the different aspects of the ADDIE model or something around that. Anything you could put into a portfolio like that to show some recognition of and your reflections on the various competencies to show that you understand what they are and your demonstration of a work product if possible. And if it's not something that you can show from a workplace, you can even do a mock-up of something, to show some evidence of these, that you understand these competencies, that you can meet these competencies to be an instructional designer. And Oksana, I hope that answered your question. If it didn't, go ahead and you can post another one on the discussion forum at any time, and I'll try and answer that. We have another question from Chris. This is the same Chris from earlier, and she's got another really great question here. What kinds of cautions might be discussed prior to the creation of an e-portfolio? For example, institutional policies on copyright.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think pretty well, yeah. So we're in the initial stages of just figuring out stuff like that for our own college. There are, copyright guidelines as to what you can use. You have to be kind of careful especially if you're in a teacher education situation, about the kind of materials you bring from a school, let's say, and whether that involves children, groups of children, pictures, things like that. I don't think we actually have a policy other than our college policy on, that sort of thing, which would probably be very broad and loose. That's another thing that's kind of in the works. There are a lot of things to have to worry about, I guess, in the sense of I would say more along what I just mentioned, like when you're taking pictures or video of interactions with kids and stuff like that. As far as the other materials, I guess the copyright laws are what they are, 10% of this, or you're allowed to get about this much of that, and any of the commercial distributions of materials, like a movie, you probably can't put up there, of course, and that's probably pretty clear. I would be just more concerned about maybe the things to do with what you do in schools if you're a teacher, that sort of thing, or also just maybe oversharing some of the things that you do. And again, I'm talking specifically in terms of teaching, because teaching is a profession, but it's a personal, it's personal professional, and they can bleed over. So we don't have any guidelines for that. I guess that's kind of people's judgment on what they want to share. But it can get a little gray. So I guess to err on the side of caution when it comes to sharing anything like that. I will say that, yeah, you just have to kind of just be cognizant of that, right? That it's going online, However, you can still restrict it in some types of formats. I mean, like with Mahara, let's say, you can have friends or groups, and but still you're never assured that things won't go beyond that.
Right, right. Um, what about I'm going to make an assumption that, just to clarify this for whoever's watching, student material that goes into the ePortfolio system, that is, unless it's copyrighted material from somewhere else, that that portfolio, the content of it remains the property of the student.
Yeah, I would say that's right. So, for example, if they've made lesson plans, or if they've done, they developed some resource materials, and I've had students develop like what they call slow-motion videos, or things like that. That are their resources. That's their materials. I think it used to be that anything, and again, I stand to be corrected. I haven't looked at copyright law a lot lately. But it used to be, I thought, that in any kind of university course, if you wrote a paper or anything like that, it was kind of public domain stuff. That might have changed with the latest iteration of copyright law, and that I'm not sure. I'd have to check up on it. But typically, in terms of my own teaching stuff, that's the student stuff. I usually ask for a release if I'm going to use it. Mm-hmm. Or some sort of like consent for use of their materials if it's in my class. Though there's generally like at the beginning of a class that I do, I'll say that we're going to be doing this. We'll be sharing all this material, and it's a verbal consent. So I don't know if I'm putting myself out on a limb or not. Education is that kind of place where people want to share anyway.
Yeah.
And sharing is like what you want to do. So it's kind of a strange, ill-fitting thing in education to be thinking a lot about copyright stuff, but
yeah,
but that's the way it is.
Yeah. So when the College of Education got started in this, were they looking at other places that were already doing this, whether it was in the a college of education somewhere, or somewhere else at an institution of higher ed? Was there sort of an example that helped guide you?
Yeah, sure. So I don't want to say I'm the initiator of it all, but in a way I am. So I was at the University of Victoria like in 2003, and a couple of my colleagues there, Kathy Sanford and Tim Hopper, were working with electronic materials, and they were just starting to build their own. They were under the gun of teacher certification, and they were looking for a way to have their students, of course, present materials that would show that they are competent and that they can be certified beyond the education degree. So the BC government laid that out there. So they came up with, let's do some portfolios, let's do electronic portfolios. And those, at that stage, it was very much an in-house, build your own web page, like make a HTML page with, tablets, like sections, and fill them in and link your courses to this. Very rudimentary kind of stuff. Now they've gone on since then. I left there and came here to U of S, but I work with them in delivering that just to a degree. And they've gone on now, and they're using Mahara, and they're actually doing some research around the use of Mahara at U of Vic, and they're using that platform. So when I came here, I was kind of already had that in mind, like, here would be a great way for students to make meaning about their teaching and learning. Right. And hey, let's do this. But without kind of an outside goading, I guess, it really didn't have any kind of uptake. Not to bore you all, but I took a swing at it for a couple of years in our Indian teacher education program around a project I had on developing Aboriginal voice for our Indian teacher education people. And I was using Mahara, trying to get that underway, and there's a lot of roadblocks. But what happened eventually was some different things came together, as I mentioned. We had a lot of internships out in rural areas, distance, cost savings, the looming specter of certification from the government, and that sort of thing prompted our dean to, and I talked to our dean several times about, this would be a good thing to do, maybe, give students flexibility. But again, I was much more interested in it as a meaning-making tool for our students to have a rich experience, share their experience, more than a certification thing. But it's a bit of a blend of both. So that's maybe kind of the root of where our implementation is coming from,
Right.
and it's kind of evolving and changing. And my pure idealistic educator self would want it purely for assessment, for learning and not of learning. But that's not the reality.
Right. Right. Well, like the question we had from Oksana about an ePortfolio for an instructional designer. I can see anything that you're demonstrating that you potentially need to demonstrate competencies in.
Mm-hmm.
That an ePortfolio would be effective. But also, as you've said, for meaning making, and whether that if that could be a tool like Mahara, or it could be from a blog, because a blog is a great way for a great place for students to reflect on their learning. And you talked about teacher sharing, and I think that's why so many teachers do blog. It's this desire we have to share our learning and the resources that we come across and the ones that we create. And so having an outlet such as an ePortfolio is very much like a blog in that sense.
Yeah, I think with the portfolio, it is more structured. Like in Mahara, you can blog,
Yeah.
and you can do quite a few different things in Mahara.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I'll just say, because there's the overriding specter of certification, it has to be a more structured, codified thing than just a pure blog, right?
Yeah.
But having said that, blogging and stuff would be really good, and you could include it, as evidence of your own reflection on your own teaching, that sort of thing, or whatever you're doing, I guess. But it'll be hard for somebody trying to gauge what you're doing to read, a lot of blog posts versus, a one page that has a very distinct evidence brought and very pointed explanations of how it fulfills the competencies. So that's kind of what I think the electronic portfolio that we're doing helps in that sense. It's
right.
And even given that, it's still pretty flexible. Like you can just bring in a lot of different things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tim, we have a question from another Tim.
And Tims are everywhere.
He missed a little bit about the part on providing support for students, but you were talking about there's two things to this. One, you were talking about that there is some technological support through staff within the College of Education, and you talked about other institutions that had videos, and Mahara has its own support thing, and that's for the technological side. But you've mentioned many times about the importance of for you is the students making meaning and using their ePortfolios for that. So what kind of support is being provided for the students, I guess, on that side of things to help guide them on, okay, I have this ePortfolio, yeah, I could put in some evidence, but what's a good way of doing that is probably, especially for students who are just starting out doing this. And this is the kind of advice that I think that a lot of people who are going to see this, or regardless of what discipline they're in, are going to be interested in. So how do you advise students, and how do you help get them to the point where they can provide evidence, but reflect in ways that is that meaning making?
Yeah, that's a really good question. That makes me think of, like, I don't know, photography. Either you can go out and take a whole bunch of pictures and then go back and select the one you think is what you want, or you can go out with something very specific in mind, and you're looking for that one picture or two or three pictures, and you know exactly what you're looking for. Mm-hmm. So and people operate in different ways, and there's some serendipity in just taking lots of pictures, or in like collecting lots of different evidence and being attentive, but that means you have to go back later. So I would say you really want to have a good idea, and let's just talk teacher certification or whatever kind of competency you're aiming at. Mm-hmm. You want to have a really good idea of what that is. So we have like 15, and I can probably bring them up here if you want them, but mm-hmm. We have just different types of competencies that are broad enough but specific enough to allow a lot of flexibility in how they address them.
Mm-hmm.
This is almost like I tell my grad students, everything falls out of the question you want to ask, right?
Yeah.
And it's not about whether you're going to use a car or Tumblr or LinkedIn or whatever you're going to use. It's about what do you want to do, and what is your question? You know, what competency do you need to address? You know, and then that'll narrow it down. So it shouldn't be just, you know, how do I demonstrate good teaching? It should be something like, you know, how do I demonstrate my facility with curriculum materials? You know, how do I demonstrate my competencies with multiple teaching strategies? Like, you should try to actually get hold of something, and there'll be lots of opportunities. And when you're thinking about that going into a teaching situation or whatever situation, that's kind of in the back of your mind. Then that is something that you can actually, you know, focus on, and it'll make you attend to those things that will display that for you. I don't know if that helps, but I just say get really focused on what you want to prove, you know, or show.
Yeah. I think I'm out of questions at this time. I know there tends to be a little bit of a lag between what people are seeing, between us talking and what people are seeing. So I'm going to give it just a couple more minutes.
Sure.
We're about 40 minutes into this, and if we don't have any more questions come in, then I can let Tim go, because I know you said something about needing to go pick up a child.
Children.
I have one of those, I understand. Is there anything else that you want to add? Is there anything about like where you're going next with this?
Well, I think for us, as far as a college, we're just kind of implementing it, trying to understand, and like a lot of the questions brought up issues, right? About and issues of like who controls what can you post, how do you know you've got good evidence, who's going to review it, you know, how do you support people? There's all those kinds of logistical things. Just even the culture of the ePortfolio. What do you want it to do in your college? There's a lot of different balls to juggle. I don't know if I need to say much more about it. Again, I'll just display my bias, which is I really look at these things as a place for people to be flexible, creative, in trying to understand who they are as professionals, you know, where they're going, and to leverage the ways they like to do things and bring evidence. You know, I'm an educator. I'm really interested in how meaningful things are for anybody I'm working with, more so than how does it meet other people's requirements. Though those are a reality too. But anyway, portfolios, electronic ones, can be that. They can offer that space as well as a lot of other kind of technologies. But yeah.
Right. Well, I haven't gotten anything else, Tim, so I think I'm going to let you go, and we're going to wrap this up for this week. Next week is week 9, and I believe Darcy Norman from the University of Calgary will be joining us to talk about sort of bigger picture things and things to consider for when you're integrating learning technologies into your class, but also your institution. So thank you very much, Tim.
Okay.
It was a pleasure, and I learned a great deal about what's going on over in the College of Education. So that's it, and we'll see you next week, everybody. Bye-bye.